This is Ryan and Michelle, and welcome to the Celebrate MarriageCast, where we hope to restore and reclaim godly marriages through honest and real conversations.
Yay, yes. Welcome to episode 38. Today, we welcome our guest for a special Father's Day episode, Pastor Robert Lewis. Pastor Lewis is not only a pastor, but also a best-selling author of Raising a Modern-Day Knight and Rocking the Roles, Building a Win-Win Marriage. He also founded the Men's Fraternity Ministry, which includes the Authentic Manhood series, which if you are an attender of Celebrate Community Church, you may be very familiar with. We are just wrapping up a 24-week series of that program. I've heard so many amazing testimonials from that group, that ministry, and on a weekly basis, we had over 60 men in attendance, learning and growing in their relationship with Christ as they become authentic man of faith. So, Pastor Lewis, welcome to our show. We are so glad to have you here today. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Michelle. It's great to be with you and Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you just, for our listeners, would you tell them a little bit about yourself, your family, maybe just some fun facts about yourself to get to know you a little better?
Okay, I'd love to. I grew up in Louisiana and met my wife on her very first date when she was 16 years old.
Wow.
So we connected there her freshman year in high school. I was a sophomore. We dated all the way through high school, all the way through college. And then shortly after we both graduated from college, got married. And we just celebrated 53 years of marriage.
Wow. Congratulations on that.
Congratulations.
Wow. 53.
It was great. I took my wife to Africa to celebrate our 53rd wedding anniversary.
Like a safari?
We did. We went on a safari, river safari,
Cool.
and a land safari, and we have enjoyed those years of marriage. We have 4 children and 11 grandchildren.
Oh, how fun. You guys are busy then.
Yeah.
And it's great. They left home and traveled around the world. 2 boys, 2 girls, and then they got married. They've slowly migrated back to Little Rock where we live, and we've lived here for almost 50 years. And so they're right around us. In fact, just had some of my grandkids leave where they've been swimming in the pool out back.
Oh, fun.
We have real close connections with them. They're all believers. They've married believers. So we have a great Lewis community here in Little Rock.
That is so cool. We've been to Little Rock, Ryan, and we did was it a half marathon or a marathon there?
I actually ran a marathon.
Did I do the half that
You did
year?
the half
Okay,
marathon.
that's right.
Yeah.
So we did some of it together, and then you parted ways, and I said, "See ya, good luck."
Little tip, and I don't know if they still do this or not, but they have the biggest finisher medals
That's right.
of any place in the country.
Like
It's huge. It's like
a melon, the size of like a melon or something.
It's
like a
huge.
cantaloupe. Yeah, they were. Yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. Good job, Little Rock.
Mention that because my youngest son has gotten into running marathons. They just had the Little Rock Marathon. I've seen that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, they still do it.
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
My son just finished up running a 100-mile ultra marathon.
Oh my
wow.
gosh. Wow.
4.5 hours.
Wow.
No, thank you.
No, yeah.
Good for him,
Yeah.
though. That takes a lot of discipline.
Yeah,
A lot of discipline.
that marathon here in Little Rock is probably its great fame is the medal you get at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that about your family. And it sounds like a great legacy you guys are building and leaving too.
And we have a great family network here.
Awesome. Well, as Michelle said, today we have a really special episode and we want to gear it towards Father's Day, and it's fitting and it's such a special privilege to have Pastor Lewis on our show because a big passion of yours is really raising up godly men, godly husbands, godly fathers. And so today we're going to talk about fatherhood and what really makes a godly father. So what better person to have with us on our show than Pastor Lewis? So Pastor Lewis, maybe for starters, just share with us here, why the passion for godly men? You know, why is it so important to you? Why has this really been your ministry, you know, for so long?
Well, actually, I think it's a ministry that God brought to me
Hmm.
rather than me somehow figuring it out to work with men. I grew up in a home that was somewhat dysfunctional. My dad was a chronic alcoholic. My mom and dad stayed together, but it was difficult during those years growing up where my dad was struggling. My mom was constantly on him about, being responsible and those kind of things. And so by the time I graduated from high school, let me tell you, I was ready to leave town. Um, it was kind of a blessing that I got the opportunity to play college football and get the opportunity to go off to Arkansas from Louisiana, where I grew up, to play college football. But during that time is where I was introduced to Jesus Christ through the ministry of Campus Crusade for Christ in a good local church.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really life changing and impactful to me because really I was clueless growing up. My dad and I didn't have a close relationship, so when I left home, I left home in the '60s, much like a lot of young men today are leaving home without really any heart connection with their fathers and without a lot of directional clarity from their fathers. So college for me was just an escape. I kind of struggled through college trying to get my feet up under me during those years, and becoming a Christian began a journey where not only was I learning about Jesus, but I was also trying to come to terms with who I was, and especially about what it meant to be a man. When I finished college, I went off to seminary, graduated from seminary, been through a kind of a lot of changes during that time. I was actually called back to Little Rock, Arkansas, to start a church with some of my college friends.
Wow.
So I came back, got into the pastorate in the early 80s, went through a few years of trying to establish our church. And during that time, some of the guys in the church came to me and they said, "Hey, why don't you start teaching the guys about manhood?" Now, let me tell you, they were asking me to do something I was still clueless about. I didn't really know anything about manhood, but I was definitely interested in that because I'd been trying to put my life together. It was a time where the fruits of the sexual revolution of the 70s, the feminist revolution of the 70s, was beginning to infiltrate mainstream America. And as women moved out of the home and into the workplace, and as men were finding themselves now being redefined and somewhat blamed for a lot of the social maladies of the day, the guys were asking me, because they were losing a sense of their traditional identity of being the head of their home. They were asking me, "Robert, let's do a study on manhood," because really they were struggling with what it meant to be a man. Now, they were asking a guy who grew up in a dysfunctional home and who himself had not had any instruction about manhood, about helping them with their manhood. And I got to say, I didn't really know what to do. I just was at a place where I was interested. So we formed a small group. It was, I think, about 30 guys. And I went on a couple of years of research and trying to help bring clarity first to my own life and into theirs about what it meant to be a man, a husband, a father. And I've got to say, I found that journey much more difficult than maybe when I started. I thought I could just open up the Bible and it would say, "A man is,"
Right.
Just give some instruction there. And the instruction is there, but you have to mine it out. And so a couple of years later, I was beginning to figure out from the scripture for myself what it meant to be a man, and it was helping me. And then I was sharing my successes and my struggles with the guys who were attending. And they began to say, "We need to do more of this." And I said, so you're finding this is starting to help you? And these guys said, it is starting to help us. Keep doing more of it.
Yeah.
So the small group that we had of about 30 began to grow. It went, if you can believe this, it went from 30 to 300.
Wow.
And we were meeting every Wednesday at
Tenfold. That's amazing. 10 times.
It was. I mean, and again, I got to say, it wasn't stuff that I knew automatically. I was learning it. I was applying it to my own life and then sharing my struggles with those guys and my successes. They were saying it was helping them. They said, do more of it. Then as the next year rolled around, we went from 300 to 400. Then the following year, we went from 400 to 800.
Wow.
And by the end of the 90s, if you can believe this, I still got to say this, I look back and it really was amazing to me. We went to 1,400 guys.
Wow.
Every Wednesday morning to hear
wow.
me on something that I was discovering for myself. And so we named it. We named it Men's Fraternity. Eventually, we filmed the curriculum, and the curriculum went around the country and actually around the world. That was kind of the journey. But I was the first beneficiary of that, seeing
wow.
Yeah.
life change. But the biggest thing is I saw men change in ways that I would never imagine. And the big takeaway of that journey was just simply this. It's important for a man to discover how to follow Jesus, but it's also super important for men to get clear about their manhood, because most men aren't.
Yeah.
Manhood fog. I mean, even to this day, I think the fog of manhood has enveloped America in a way that guys are just guessing at their manhood. And when guys guess, they usually guess wrong. So we need, more important than anything else with men today, is we need men to learn two things. We need men to learn about what it means to follow Jesus, and then men need to learn what it means to be a man. They need to get out of that manhood fog and learn practical skills about what it means to be a man at home, with their kids, with their friends, with their workplace, as they follow Jesus Christ. But here's the good news. When they learn that, just like I learned it back in the 80s and 90s, when you learn manhood clarity along with your spiritual clarity, great things start happening.
Yeah. There's so much there. And I think two things that are jumping out to me, Pastor Lewis, and maybe you can speak into this, even more. But one, I think it's so interesting that I think sometimes we fall into this generational thing, where you came from a household that wasn't necessarily modeled for you, this idea of manhood, right? And so you're learning it, but I think so often people get stuck in, well, this is what I know. This is what I was taught, so this is what I'm going to be.
Right.
I think that happens so much. And I think part of that is that willingness to learn, to say, okay, and I don't know if this was a motivation for you to say, hey, I'm going to learn something different.
I'm going to break that cycle.
I'm going to break the cycle. I'm going to do something different. Maybe that's part of motivation. But I think that's so important, that willingness to learn, to do something different.
Well, you're hitting on gold when you say that, because one of the most important things that men have to break through is the fact that they think they're supposed to know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
The biggest lie over men's lives is that they think they're supposed to know what it means to be a man. They get married and they think they're supposed to know what it means to be a married man. They have children. They think they are supposed to know what it means to be a dad. And of course, we know we got Father's Day coming up, and I wish the guys a happy Father's Day here. But here's the thing I have to tell men about my life and about their life. Who told you you're supposed to know?
Yeah.
The reality is we don't know. All the things I just mentioned about manhood, fatherhood, being a husband, those are all learned skills. And unless you grew up in a home where dad taught you those skills, you go out into young adulthood not knowing, but thinking you're supposed to know,
Hmm.
and then just guessing.
Yeah.
Is a recipe for frustration, for failure, and for getting to a place where, you're just leaving damage everywhere you go. In fact, when I was a
Sure.
young married man, and I was in the midst of going to seminary and I was guessing at my marriage, I was leaving damage in my wife. And I kept thinking, I should know how to do this.
Hmm.
But I needed somebody to step into my life and to say, why are you supposed to know this? Who taught you? And then I could have said, nobody taught me. And then it leads you to the breakthrough, and that is those things of fatherhood, manhood, parenthood are all learned skills. And it takes humility to admit you don't know. And then you get on a path of learning how, which is the great breakthrough.
Sure. And it seems like that could lead to a lot of shame too. If you're living like, I feel like I should know, but I don't know, that leads to shame. But to take that pressure off, and even looking at your own journey, Pastor Lewis, I love how you stepped into the men's fraternity and you said, I didn't know what I was doing, but it's like that saying that says, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And look at your story, and what a hope and inspiration for men that are listening and watching today, that, hey, for a listener, if that's you, if you didn't have the best example, there's hope for you. And we're going to unpack that today.
Yeah.
And I think that's just so hope-giving. So thank you for sharing that history of your ministry and how you got started. That's so cool to hear the story of just God's really redeeming work on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the fact that so many men are living under that weight of shame, and I'm supposed to know, and I'm not doing well. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is you didn't know, you weren't supposed to know. Somebody should have helped you. And if they didn't help you, then you're living in a place where the best thing you can do is say, I need help.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, that takes humility, like you said, just being humble. Pastor Lewis, diving into Father's Day, what would you say is the top issue that you see, or one of the top issues that you see when it comes to fatherhood today? Something that you could kind of speak to the dads listening on.
Yeah, it's just what we've been talking about. Most dads think that fatherhood is natural. And fatherhood is not natural. It's a learned skill. The best fathers are the ones who had somebody mentor them in the basics of fatherhood. And again, if you think of just the natural life cycle, that probably should have been a dad. The problem is we have half the population growing up without a dad even at home. And then you've got probably another 25%, which takes us to 75%, but another 25% who have a dad who is at home and may be providing, but he's not mentoring his kids. He's disconnected from his kids. And so that leaves these kids with these huge dad deficits, these huge empty spaces where they're just basically guessing about life, and they're running around with their friends who are like them, and they're just making up life as they go, which is oftentimes a recipe for problem behavior, creating wounds in others, falling into loneliness, addiction, and a host of other devils that pursue children who go into young adulthood without having had any investment in their lives. So I just say the number one thing that dads need to hear on this broadcast is there's some good news, and the good news is fatherhood is a learned skill, and there are plenty of resources to help you up your game. You need resources, and you need other men who would join with you and say, let's go on this fatherhood journey together. Yeah. I mean, the big breakthrough for me, if I can just tell a quick story.
Yeah, absolutely.
With two other men, and we were having a party at my house one night, And between us, we had probably 11 kids between the three families. And one of the moms there looked at us three dads and they said, "Hey, how are you going to raise these sons into manhood?" And we all had, little preschool sons. And I'll never forget when she said, "How are you going to raise these sons into manhood?" We looked at each other and all three of us just kind of shrugged and went, "That's a good question. How are we going to do that?"
Yeah.
And we admitted among ourselves is we didn't know how. And one thing led to another, and we had a discussion. And out of that, we agreed that we would start meeting to discover what smart dadhood was all about. What does it mean to be a good dad? So we looked at resources, read some books, kind of formed an accountability group. And over the next 25 years, we worked together to raise our kids into healthy adulthood. But it was what we learned together with the resources that were out there that we ended up raising 12 kids into what today, now that most of them are in their late 30s and early 40s, into responsible adulthood.
Pastor Lewis, is that where the inspiration for this book, Raising a Modern Day Knight, came from then? That quest to learn more about how to raise a son?
That's exactly where it came from. In fact, if you start opening the pages, there's a picture of me and the two other dads, and we committed to raising our sons into being a man, which I had to figure out with them what it meant to be a man, and then what are the steps that we needed to do to work with our boys to raise them up into this exemplary manhood. And so we did that together. And I guess the good news of all of this is all the boys, 7 of them, all the girls, 5 of them, have grown up. They're all have their own family. They've married well. They have Christian spouses. Then their kids are, now moving into raising families of their own. But it really started with an admission. And that's what I want our dads maybe to hear on this broadcast. The admission is, we didn't know how to raise healthy sons or daughters.
Oh.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get with others and talk about it. And then 3, C, we needed to find what resources that were out there that together we could process our parenting with through those years that those children were under our tutelage. And it worked.
Yeah. Right.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. I think 2 things for guys. And again, this is 100% me. So I'm just, this is right for me. And I'm not stereotyping, but I think a couple of things. One, admitting that you don't know is really a huge thing. I know guys that we don't like to say that. We don't like to say we don't know, or we don't have an answer, or we don't know how to do something. So that step is huge. And I think the other really key component that I've heard you say is you have to get rid of this lone wolf mentality of, I'm going to figure this out. It truly is this kind of band of brothers of saying, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. You don't know what you're doing. Like,
let's do it together.
Hey, let's figure this out together. And like, we're on the same team. I say that all the time, same team, but of men coming together and saying, hey, one, I acknowledge that I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to, and let's do this together. I think that is such a key component, because I think so many guys set off to do things on their own.
Yeah, that's the default mechanism of men. Is when they look around the room and they see other men, they assume they know what they're doing, and I should know what I'm doing. But the reality is, no one in the room knows what they're doing.
Right.
They just don't, and that's okay, because we're not supposed to. Manhood is a learned skill as well, and you need foundational material. I mean, the most foundational thing about manhood is you need to have a definition of manhood. That's what the men's fraternity curriculum is built on. It's built on a biblical definition of manhood that's transferable, because you can't become what you can't define. And most men today in America, if you went up to them and said, hey, can you give me a compelling definition, just a short definition of what it means to be a man? I would tell you that most men could not define manhood. Not in a way that motivates them, not in a way that they can measure their manhood. And so what they're living in is just a guesswork manhood where they make it up every day, and it leads to dead ends and problems.
Yeah, that is so true. I think if you were to ask people, I don't know, I don't know what people would say.
Maybe like strong, protector, but those are all, I don't know, kind of vague.
Yeah, I mean,
traits. They'll come up with traits,
Sure.
Things like that, and that's good. But let me just give you a story where my son, when he was in high school, he had gone through a lot of the manhood stuff that we're talking about with me and some other dads, and he was at a Waffle House late at night with his buddies, and they were eating, and as high schoolers do, and somehow a discussion came up about manhood. And one of the guys at the table said, hey, guys, what do you think a man is? And it got quiet, and, they said, yeah, that's a good question. What is a man? And my son was sitting there with these friends, and he says, well, I know what a man is. And they said, well, okay, Garrett, you tell us, what is a man? And my son said, well, a real man is one who rejects passivity, accepts responsibility, leads courageously, and expects God's greater reward in life.
Wow. Wow, yes. That's amazing.
And these guys heard that and they went, where did you get that, Garrett? And he said, well, I got it from my dad. But here's the problem. First of all, most dads aren't giving their sons, they're saying to their sons, be a man. But if their son turned to him and said, well, Dad, what does that mean? The dad couldn't tell him. But when a dad can transfer a specific biblical definition of manhood to their sons, it is unbelievably empowering, because the son now has, at least at the core, a basic roadmap that he can measure himself every day by. Am I accepting responsibility? Am I leading courage? This is what manhood's about, but you can't define you can't become what you can't define.
Pastor Lewis, will you repeat those? I know you just started to repeat 2 of them. Will you repeat those? Were there 4 of them? 4 or 5? Will you repeat those 4 for our listeners again?
Sure. And you can see it unfold, by the way, in the Garden of the Garden of Eden, when God is helping the first man kind of get his act together. In that discussion, these encounters between God and Adam, basically he tells Adam, you're going to have to reject passivity. You just can't sit here. You've got to accept responsibility for the woman I gave you, for the life I'm giving you. You've got to lead courageously, because there's an enemy here that wants to rob you of that manhood. And then you've got to believe, if you follow that outline, you'll be rewarded in life. I'll reward you with the better life. So the 4 prongs of basic manhood is reject passivity. Don't just stand there. Accept the responsibility that I have given you in the garden and now gives you through the scripture. Lead courageously, because for every man today, there's an enemy wanting to sidetrack you from that core masculinity, and believe that if you follow that, there's a greater reward than what this world can give you. That's the core definition of manhood.
I just have goosebumps, just thinking about what if every man embraced that, what a different world this would be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, incredible. Ryan, I feel like you did a really great job of that, thinking about the just living intentionally. You reject passivity. You're so present and focused, and just each of those. The second one was it lead courageously? Sorry. accept responsibility,
Yeah.
how you show up and how you lead our family, and you believe that God is going to do these great things in our life as a result. It's just been such a great model of that.
Yeah.
And you have to know it's going to take courage, because just like the first man Adam experienced, there's an enemy trying to rob you of those responsibilities. And you need to accept those responsibilities, but it's going to require courage to live them out. But to live them out, you got to believe that there's a greater reward and that God will give you that greater reward.
Yeah.
Poor definition of manhood.
What an amazing definition.
Incredible.
Yeah. If you didn't write that down,
Hit the rewind. Like a couple of times and write it down.
Absolutely. Pastor Lewis, obviously as we're looking at this, parenthood has changed over the last several decades. Like what are you seeing in this current generation that has changed?
Well, the biggest change has been going on now for several generations, and that is that the family is fracturing. When we went from an agrarian society to an industrial society, Dad went from being present with his kids every day on the quote farm to suddenly he got up and went off to work, and it was just mom and the kids. So that was the first wave of fracturing. But then as we've moved into the modern era, we've gone even further, where mom has left the home for the workplace, and now the kids are farmed out. So the family's fractured even further. And now with the new social media generation, people have even fractured for one another. Even among peers, they're looking down at a phone, not looking at each other. And that fracturing has created for families, even though they come home to be with each other, they're unbelievably lonely. Loneliness is the predominant feeling of this generation. I know when we hired the Barna group to study manhood of men under 40, I remember when that survey was finished, they said one of the things that stood out was how incredibly lonely men under 40 were. They didn't feel connected to their dads or their families, but they didn't feel even connected to one another. They lived in this kind of closed world where they were just with themselves and a screen. That has done unbelievable damage to this generation with depression, with coping mechanisms like drugs and alcohol and those kind of things. We're living in an age where people are just lonely.
It was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Ryan, I feel like you've said that thing before where you're like, I just feel lonely. I don't feel like I have these men in my corner in my group, and we've done intentional things to be in small groups and stuff like that. But even within that, there was a season where people were so busy and they're, trading sports for, small groups and all these things where it's like people are just running. But to find really great men in your community has taken an incredible amount of intentional work for you to find and identify and try to schedule lunches or whatever with other great guys. But I know it's been tough for you. You've shared that.
Yeah.
For me, I feel like I have no problem having coffee dates with girlfriends, and it's just maybe more natural. But for you, I know that's been a really tough area.
Yeah. I mean, I think that ties in, going back to the definition, right? I think passivity is a huge issue of, hey, it's easier for me to stare at my phone and scroll social media than it is to have a conversation.
Sure.
To meet with somebody, to dig into life, to dig into figuring out, okay, how do I become a better dad? How do I become a better father? How do we have a better marriage? Those things. It's so easy, and I get it. There's so many things competing for our time and our energy. And so, but I think that is one thing that I think I see so often is people choosing an easier route.
Yeah.
Passivity.
Yeah. And I mean, to your credit, Ryan, you have said no to social media. You've been off of it for over a decade and a half, because you want to be intentional. But I think too, just busyness of life. Wouldn't you say that people chasing their kids around, and sometimes they think of like, okay, you're going to gain the world, but lose your soul. Like so what? So your kid goes to 5 activities a week, but so what? If you're not in relationship with God, you don't have community, they're not in a faith community, you're just trading. It's a trade-off. Yeah. And, the reality is very few kids go on to be professional athletes anyways. So I don't know. I think about that often, but as we've seen, some of your relationships kind of, just people get so busy, but you've tried to be very intentional about fostering those. But anyways, all that to say, I think, Ryan has been able to relate to that lonely feeling. Yeah. And it's a heartbreaking, that's heartbreaking to hear that statistic.
Oh, listen, the fracturing of the family is the number one thing in society today. Is we've been pulled apart where we're just individual atoms circulating in this universe, every once in a while bumping into one another, but really not knowing much about relationships with one another. We're busy, but we're lonely. And that's so odd. We're kind of connected in ways that in ways unimaginable to the generation right before us through social media, and yet we're so disconnected at the same time. It's just a odd world to live in, and the antidote is the word you've used several times, Michelle, and that is intentional. We have to be intentional, and we have to clarify what we're after. We have to clarify our manhood. We have to clarify what it means to be a father, a mother, a marriage. And then we have to take intentional steps to build those things, because left to just drifting in the society in which we live, it is going to just spin us apart from one another, not connect us to one another.
That's a good word.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as we look at this, and obviously like this fracture is happening and these things, what encouragement would you give to the dads, the men out there who are watching, who are listening?
Well, this is what I've seen over the 45 years I've done men's study that I mentioned to you earlier, that I kind of stumbled into with men coming to me and saying, hey, let's put together some kind of men's study. And I realized how little I knew. But the thing that still motivates me today is that when men meet together and discover that they need help, and they're in a safe place where they can say that to one another, and then they start getting clarity from the Bible on basic definitions of life, including manhood, marriage, parenting, those kind of things, and then access that together, that's where great things happen. But if you are a Christian and you don't have an environment where you can have those safe places to talk about the basics of life, then the world in which we live are just going to pull you further and further apart from everyone. And you're going to suffer a huge deficit because of that. I just think today in the church, we just did a survey of churches and found out that 90+% of churches in America today have an active women's ministry of some kind. Just like you said, Michelle, of women getting together, talking, processing life. But here we are with the huge manhood deficit that we have today. Dads not being in the home, only half of them even being present in the home. And yet when you look at the church today, believe it or not, only 7% of churches in America today have an active, ongoing men's ministry of some kind that draws men together to talk about the basics of manhood, fatherhood, being a husband, how to be good with friends. That kind of communication doesn't exist in most churches today. And the fact that you guys as a church are even having this kind of podcast to talk about these things, good for you. We need that kind of input, but men need a safe place to talk about the basics of masculinity together because they just don't exist in our world today.
I wonder if there is, so we have this incredible authentic manhood group here at Celebrate Community Church. We're in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. For our listeners that are out of state, out of market, out of country, how can they form something like this? Is it starting with, do you have resources online where they can get their own group together, or at their church home if they're out of the area? Is there a way that they can recreate this special thing that we have here at Celebrate?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's what I've been doing for the last 40 years, is helping churches know that there are resources available. In fact, we just came out with a new resource that's free of charge.
Amazing.
It's called Better Man, and you can get those resources at betterman.com. Okay, and if you went online, there'll be a host of resources available and a curriculum on manhood, and you can download it on your phone or on a screen for free. You can get the workbooks and the training all for free, because some men came together about 4 years ago and said, we need to get this material out there. But one of the things holding guys back and churches back is they don't have the training that they don't have to pay for. So I challenged them to resource it so it would be all free.
Incredible.
Wow.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's different. It's a little different than Men's Fraternity, which was sold through Lifeway Resources. But Better Man, which is a 2.0 version of Men's Fraternity, is all available for free. So it's available.
Incredible. And for our listeners that are local to Sioux Falls, we are having as Authentic Manhood wraps up in a couple of weeks here, we are having a new series called Winning at Work and Home that will start end of June. You can visit our website, celebrate.church, to get signed up for that program. It's going to be just as incredible. But otherwise, like Pastor Lewis said, betterman.com, we can put that link for you as well. So thank you for sharing those resources.
Now just remember, I mean, if you just think in a perfect world, we would have good fathers and good mothers. A son or daughter would be born. They would be mentored, so to speak, by their parents who invested emotional stability in them, directional stability, and then launched them out into a healthy young adulthood. And what we know is if there's a two-parent family in America today where mom and dad are investing their kids, those kids leave home 5 or 6 times more advantaged than a child growing up where dad isn't present or isn't there. So it's there. But the problem is most kids are growing up without that kind of input. So it's going to happen in a way that's not natural. It's like the word you've used, and I appreciate it, intentional. Mm-hmm. And churches need to be intentional, knowing that men are not going to get what should have been natural before sin entered the world. They're going to have to get it in a more artificial way, which we call discipleship. And that is, you've got to bring men together. It's got to be on a regular basis where they get with other men and learn how to be a man, how to be a dad, how to be a parent, how to be a husband, and how to be a friend. And it's going to have to go through this masculine discipleship. But where men get it, they flourish. That's what I've learned as a pastor that surprised me. When we started at our church, men not only grew in Christ, but they grew as men because they were getting that material and they love it. And they become the beneficiaries of it. And then they begin to share it with their friends, but most importantly, invest in their family. So get the material out there and get men together.
Well, Pastor Lewis, thank you so much. This has been so good. And just as we kind of transition here, Michelle, do you know what time it is?
I do, and it's a very special edition of this time because these are mystery questions submitted by real life participants of the Authentic Manhood series that are taking this class right now.
Yeah. So there's quite a few questions.
There are quite a few. We're going to see if we can power through.
We're going to get to as many as we can here. All right. So the first question here.
Drum roll.
When you taught Authentic Manhood in the early 2000s, that was 20 years ago. Looking at the newer generation, like teenagers and men in their 20s, what would you say to the older generation or in order to encourage and walk with the younger generation today?
What would I say to encourage them? I would say that they're going to have to make themselves available to interact with these younger men who are really hungry for an older man to speak into their life.
That's great.
Younger men have told us over and over again they want to speak with an older man, but making that older man, younger man connection is a difficult thing in our world today. But younger men want it, and older men need to be encouraged to reach into the lives of younger men and have coffee or whatever and just talk about life.
That's a great prompting. So if you are maybe a little bit wiser, older man, maybe not older, but wiser, maybe, this is your prompting. This is your encouragement. I took the jar from you, Ryan. Is it okay? Can I ask one? All right.
Go ahead.
I got to get in on the fun here.
Yeah.
Okay. From my experience in doing Authentic Manhood with a table of other guys, they would all be there in a heartbeat for any of the guys struggling in marriage, life, or their relationship with the Lord. I was wondering, over the last 20 years or more, have you seen a difference in the community of men you taught?
I would say one of the things that encouraged me as a pastor is I saw more life change in men by teaching them about biblical manhood than any other sermon I ever preached. Somehow men really resonate with the subject of masculinity and being a man. And if you give them practical ways from the Bible and just through encouragement on how they can be a man and come through in life, they jump on that and they continue to do that long after those studies are over. I see more life change in men who've gone through biblical manhood than any other thing I've ever taught.
That's so great.
Wow.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great community.
All right. Next one here. Okay. I am 50 years old and a product of years of dad wounds growing up. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I passed on similar wounds to my sons, which I'm currently working on trying to rebuild since I've come to know the Lord. What would you recommend for dads in my situation where there have been years of wounds inflicted on your kids and you desperately want to rebuild, but your kids seem unwilling to accept?
That is a great question. In fact, the number one question I've gotten over the years from older men is, in going through a series on manhood, they'll come up and they will express great regret in regards to their children. And they ask, what do I do? And I think the starting place for any older dad who's got maybe a son or daughter who is resisting them or drawn back from them, or they've inflicted hurt, or they've abandoned them in some way and they're feeling guilty, the best way to reconnect is to simply set a meeting and say, I've been learning things about life in a study that I'm in on manhood, and I've realized that I've hurt you. And so will you forgive me for, and then state whatever those things are specifically to your son or daughter. And here's what I can promise. When a dad asks forgiveness for their son, from their son or daughter, from not spending time with them or working too much or whatever it might be, a son or daughter's heart immediately will open up and want to engage a parent who's not trying to make excuses for what happened, but are simply asking for forgiveness for what happened. So the great first step of reconciliation is just to go to your son or daughter and ask forgiveness.
Phenomenal response.
Yeah.
phenomenal. I felt emotion just like choking up in me as you were saying that, just imagining the situation unfold. You know what, Ryan? I feel like you're right. You should do all of them because you're the man, you're the father in the room. So, and we're doing good. You know what? And as you were saying that, I can tell that these questions are really special for the men. I hope that we can, I'm just going to say we should just do them all because we have 2 left. Yeah, that was really good. Go for it, Ryan.
All right. So out of all the 24 sessions in Authentic Manhood, is there one that particularly stands out to you in which you'd really want to get through to men?
Great question.
Well, the one where we get the biggest bump in the series is when we talk about dad. And where we get the connection with men with each other is when we do a special session where they meet together and each man tells his story of growing up under the father he grew up under and what that meant to him, how it may have impacted in a negative way him, but he gets to tell honestly his dad's story. Because when guys talk about their fathers, they bond at a depth that then allow them to go on afterwards and get real with one another on other subjects. Most men today have a powerful father story, good or bad, because at the core, dad is destiny for a man. He's the one he's still living out of the shadow of, even as he moves into adulthood. What happened between he and dad growing up, for good or for bad, will remain in a guy's life forever. And he's got to compensate or build on it based on those dad experiences.
Yeah, so good. This is a great one to end on here. With years behind you now, from doing the Men's Fraternity series, is there anything that you would update or change from what you've learned since that time?
That's a great question.
That is a good question. Well, most of the lessons, as guys going through it will see, are taken from the scripture. And the thing I think I have maybe leaned on is the fact that the material, because it's biblical, doesn't get outdated. God's word is timeless.
Yeah.
Now, the applications from those sessions maybe need updating. And as we talked earlier, with the family today, fracturing even more so than when I taught the material in the 90s, things like being even more intentional become even more important in the 21st century. But one of the things all men need to know is that you have to learn about manhood. It's just not going to happen naturally. You've got to grow in being a dad by getting smarter. Don't think it's just going to somehow pop into your mind. Life is intentional, and that is because it's intentional. It has to come through getting together and learning the basics of manhood through the scripture with other men. You do that, and I can guarantee any listener, especially as a man listener here as we move into this Father's Day celebration, I can promise you it will pay great returns as you grow in your wisdom about manhood. It will pay great intentions. Don't guess at your manhood. Learn it. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say I've learned over all these years.
So good.
Yeah, that's such a great line. I love it. That is like perfect timing.
Yeah. Oh, it is. On the second, we said 10 minutes for that. Just kind of as we chatted to ourselves, and it was like 10:05. We did great. We did it. We got through all the questions. Thank you guys in the Authentic Manhood that submitted those. Those are great. Thank you. Pastor Lewis, thank you so much for this time. One thing I wanted to say, Ryan, do you have that book? Can you just hand that to me?
Yeah. There you go.
As Pastor Chris, our marriage pastor here, said that he was lining you up to be a guest on the show, Ryan was like, oh my goodness, his book, Raising a Modern Day Knight, was such an impactful book. And I just have to say thank you for the honor of that we have here of interviewing you, of being on the show. This is a really big deal. And I feel like you're another role model of Ryan's, that through your book, through your words, through your classes, that this has just been such a rich time. So thank you for being here. You've made an impact on my husband. And I know that you brought this book along, Ryan, because you were just excited
It's
to.
a tremendous book. I would encourage everyone to get it. It's so good.
Yeah. Pastor Lewis, do you have any parting thoughts or anything else that you didn't get to share that you'd like to?
Well, thank you, Michelle. I do have one thing I think that I think every man can utilize this Father's Day. It's interesting when you look over the life of Jesus as he was living out his life on earth. There was several occasions where God spoke audibly to his son from heaven where other people heard it. And it's interesting that every time the Father to the Son said exactly the same thing. He said to his Son, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." And I thought to myself when I was doing the men's material, isn't it interesting that when God spoke audibly to his Son, he did three things in that statement. He told his Son that others could hear, "Son, I love you. This is my beloved Son. I love him." The second thing he said is, "I'm proud of him. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." And then the last thing he said is, "You need to listen to him because what he does, he's good at." And I call that the blessing. And every dad needs to give his son or daughter that blessing by saying, eyeball to eyeball, face to face, arm in arm, however you do it. A son or daughter hungers to hear from their father. "Son, daughter, I love you." Look them directly in the face. "I am proud of you. And here's one thing I admire about you," and then state it. That is something every dad can do for their son or daughter that will leave a blessing in their life. And you don't just do it once, you do it all through their life. You can do it. I mean, my son right now is a doctor, a commercial real estate developer. My daughter's a teacher, but they love for dad to get in their face and say, "I love you." And it's hard for a dad to say this. And I know men hunger for their dads to say this. Daughters hunger for their dads to say this. "I love you. I'm proud of you. And you're really good at this." You do that, and you'll give your son or daughter a blessing for a lifetime. And it would be great this Father's Day, as they bless you by saying Happy Father's Day, you bless them by giving them what I call the Father's blessing to the Son. You give them that blessing with those three components. It'll be a special moment in your son or daughter's life.
Wow. Yeah.
I wrote that down.
Yeah.
It's really great.
Write that down. Wow.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pastor Lewis. So we have your website, betterman.com. Are there any other websites or places that our listeners can keep up with you and your work?
Well, I think that's the primary one. That's the one I'm proud of in this season of my life. And we've got a lot of different men who are speaking through that website.
Okay.
Materials that they've developed that would be highly valuable to any church or any group of men who are wanting to process their masculinity in a biblical way.
Okay, great. Pastor Lewis, thank you so much for being on our show today. Truly, it's been such a gift to our listeners and to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us today on this special Father's Day edition of the Celebrate MarriageCast. We'll post Pastor Lewis's betterman.com link in our show notes, but also if you need additional marriage helper resources, you can find us at celebrate.church/marriage. Additionally, we would love to hear your feedback from today's show. We have a text number that you can send a message to. That's 605-951-0110. We'll have that in our show notes as well. We'd love to hear how the Celebrate MarriageCast has impacted your life, your marriage, your fatherhood, your manhood. And additionally, we have a new Instagram channel. It's the Celebrate MarriageCast. We would love to have you follow us on our new account at Celebrate MarriageCast on Instagram. and share this episode. That's how the word is going to get out there. We have such a great listenership and follower base, but we would love to keep reaching more people, and that would mean so much to us as well. So thank you all again, and we hope you have a great week, and happy Father's Day.
Thank you all, and happy Father's Day to all your listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you.